Welcome everybody to this webinar with our Hall of Famer, the first in the series with AFA member and industry doyen Russ Collins. Russ entered the industry about 50 years ago. I won't necessarily go into a lengthy introduction about his illustrious career because hopefully this fireside chat with Russ will give you some insights into his career and the successes that he's had. But 50 years later, whilst he's not advising anymore, Russ is still training, coaching and mentoring new and existing advisors. A couple of quick bits of housekeeping. So there's one CPD hour that will be allocated for attending this webinar, which ticks that compliance box. So you'll hear more about that in the coming week via the AFA. We'd encourage you to also complete the survey because we'd love to hear from you about what worked and what didn't work and what you'd like us to see as part of these webinar series. We will take some questions at the end of the webinar and we'll allow hopefully 10 to 15 minutes. So I encourage you to send any questions through. Please do so via the Q&A feature on Zoom, not chat. So Q&A feature for questions and not chat. Look, as I said, pleased to bring Russell Collins to you. I have given Russell a sense of the questions that I'm going to ask him so he can be prepared. But they're not all Dorothy Dix's. And a couple of things, a couple of opening remarks from my perspective. Whilst Russ is renowned as a risk specialist, his ideas and concepts can equally be applied to investment specialists and holistic practitioners alike. Also, the ideas and the concepts that Russell will talk about, they're not just in, he won't talk about them just in theory. He used them extensively in his 40-year career advising clients in building an extremely successful practice. So they're tried and tested, and hopefully they'll be of some value. So let's get into it. Russ, in 2015, after you'd sold your practice and retired as an advisor, you're awarded and became a member of the Order of Australia, particularly to service to business in the financial planning industry. So a great honour and great privilege. Tell me, was it a surprise? How did you find out? Were you called by the Queen? How did you feel when you were given this tremendous news and this honour?
No, well, certainly it's a surprise if you don't know how the system works. I was on the Queen's birthday list for June in 2015, but I got a letter in March from a committee who said that I was being considered for this. I'd been nominated as being considered for the forthcoming thing, but not to mention it. They wanted to check what I was being up for and find out local newspapers so they could put stuff in. But finish it off, say don't say anything because these things can be reviewed at the last moment. And so, obviously, when it came up, yes, I was still surprised just looking in to see what the sea of names were there. However, what did I get a letter from the Queen? No, but I did get one from the Governor General. Maybe for when I turn 100, I'll get something from the Queen. You know, I expect to still be coaching by then anyway. Yeah.
Very good. So how did you feel about this tremendous honour? I mean, it's a lifetime of achievement and one of the highest sort of awards that you can get as an ordinary citizen in Australia. Yeah.
Well, Sam, it's a very good question and it's pertinent to today because it took me back to a conversation I had at my first $1 million roundtable meeting. I know you can talk about that later, in 1973 in Seattle, and I introduced this guy who I'd sort of had as a hero. I'd never met him, but also a legend in the industry. His name was Frank Sullivan. And I got introduced to him. The fellow introduced me. He said, Russell's a great fan of yours, Frank. And he said, oh. And he said, where are you heading? I said, back to the hotel. He said, I'll walk down with you. So walking down this big hill, I remember, and one of the questions I said, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? He said, sure. I said, why do you get so involved in the industry? Because he's been right up the totem pole for the executives and all of that. And he stopped me dead. We're walking together and he turned around, he faced me and he said, Russell, he said, there are two types of people in our industry. He said, the givers and the takers. He said, you have to decide what you want to be. And then we kept walking. And I thought, well, anyway, when I got back home, I was a member of the AFA, but then I started to get on committees and so on like that. And it just reminded me, like he said, you're either a giver or a taker. And so I think I've been a giver, and I'm happy that I've had such a long involvement with the AFA, but never thinking at all that I get this award.
Well done, and congratulations. Now you touched on MDRT. Your name is synonymous with MDRT here in Australia and overseas. You've spoken at on the main platform 7 times, I think, at the annual conferences overseas, sometimes in front of 10,000 people, a life member. Can you elaborate on the impact of MDRT on your personal and professional life, firstly? And secondly, I just want to touch on what's the relevance of organisations such as MDRT in the lives of modern day advisors here in Australia and overseas?
Okay, well, very quickly, MDRT, it was started in 1927 by a handful of life insurance agents, as they were at the time, who were discussing how they got to where they got to. And now there are 72,000 members worldwide in it, and they meet every year on a daily basis. And there's usually 10 to 14,000 in attendance at those meetings. For me, it was the opportunity to hear from the best, most successful advisors in the industry, telling me, like the audience, word for word, what they did, what they succeeded at, and how they did it. And you can't find that in any other conference that you'll go to, certainly in Australia, but to get that sort of detail. And so all that information I got, I took loads of notes, and I took them home year after year. I went there about 30 times, I think. But when I come back, and then I would take what they said and I'd Russellize it. So then I could bring it, so I could talk to you as though it was coming from me, you know. And so the other thing that they do is that there's a big emphasis on there's more to work, there's more to life than work. And they develop what they call the whole person concept. And what that is that from all of us to remember that we have a family as well as other commitments outside of the job to balance our lives. So the theme of the whole concept, it's a long concept, but it's to bring balance into your lives. And it works on the assumption, on the motto that, to me, no success in the field is worth a failure in the home. And so for me, to keep going back year after year was renewal. I kept seeing that I was in the right job for the right reason. Inspiration, they had the most wonderful inspiration speakers that could change your life. And then finally, growth. Take away ideas that would help me grow my business.
Okay, very good. And what do you think the relevance of MDRT and organisations such as MDRT are in the lives of modern day advisors? I mean, does that still resonate? Yeah,
I think that what does a I won't mention it, but what does an association do for its members? Like, for example, does it have a whole person concept? Is there an emphasis? All these speakers that come in at the main platform, some of them are just totally related to family life, health, and the spiritual life, all those types of things, where you can get, like, I like to go to a conference and walk away with one thing that I could turn into action the next day, whether it was a health thing or whatever there, but just one idea. And I've been to conferences where I walked away and I haven't had any ideas at all. So I think that if they know their members, what their members want, what is it that appeals? Do they go out into the membership before they put a program up and say, what are you looking for? But come back to that one, there's a lot of divorces. In the 1970s, there was a lot of divorces in the industry at that time because we were working, 60, 70 hours a week out at night time, and it just broke up marriages. And so when you see that what somebody says, no success in the field is worth a failure in the home, that enables, certainly in my case, enabled me to put a lot of balance into my life. And I brought back a lot of messages from MDRT about how to become a better husband, a better father, a better grandfather.
Yeah. And look, and those of us that have read the book, there's examples of gems that you've picked up over attending MDRT meetings in your book. They're littered with them. So, and we'll get to that in a minute. But we're talking about pressures in the industry, and at the moment, ethics is something that's topical to all advisors. Not that acting ethically is a pressure on doing business, but certainly, we're having to do an ethics exam, an ethics course as part of the new education standards. Presumably, your ethics, whilst you're advising your clients, and the ethics in which you ran your business, were instructed by your faith, which plays a significant role in your life. Deeply personal matter, but do you have any overarching comments about this aspect of your life that you would like to share?
Well, first of all, I think that ethics is a very subjective area, and if you ask 12 people, you get 12 different interpretations on it. And certainly the Royal Commission had it at the forefront, during all of that. So personally, in my business life, I felt that ethics and integrity went hand in hand because they both relate to moral principles. And so at one MDRT meeting, the speaker there talked on time management. He had written a bestseller book, The Time Trap, and he'd interviewed the top executives, CEOs in America for this thing. But he told us the one thing these persons had in common was that they all took an hour, something like an hour a day, to do something that was totally unrelated to their business. And so when I came back and I thought about that, so I thought I'll have a 1 hour first thing in the morning, a spiritual hour. And for me, it was an opportunity to read the scriptures, to pray, to try and understand who I am and what I'm here for. And I used to do that. I used to get up at 4 o'clock, do that between 4 and 5 in the morning, because before that I used to get up at 5 o'clock. So because I had a routine, so 4 to 5, and then 5 o'clock I start to put my work together for the day. 6 o'clock out for a run, etc., like that. But I got to say, Sam, when I finished that quiet hour, I just felt that there was nothing in the day that could get me down that I couldn't do. It was just refreshing, to do that.
Okay, very, very, very good. And certainly the other thing that just came through, and I was reflecting on it, and you touched on it in the book, and those of us that know you are a basketballer, the opportunity to play with some state and national champions. But the reason I bring that up is that you say that playing sport and being part of sport was where you learned discipline. So waking up at 4 in the morning, I'd imagine you would have had your alarm clock and did that religiously day in, day out. And
well, after 20 years, you wake up at 4 o'clock. By the way, I don't get up that early now. I sleep in. I don't get up maybe till 5 or 5:30.
There you go. Look, left the public service in 1971 to join the industry. Your father wasn't a fan, your mother supported you. Can you touch on some of the challenges that you encountered in the early stages of your career and how you overcame them, and perhaps touch on the concept of resilience, maybe?
Well, first of all, having spent 15 years of my working life beforehand, I didn't really come too equipped to the industry in terms of, selling. At the same time, we had a mortgage. My wife wasn't working, and we had 2 children under 3. So it was, for me, I guess you call a work in progress that lasted for like 50 years. So when I started with it, I had, in the first year, I was told I'd only have to work about 20 hours a week. I worked 70 to 80 hours a week in the first year, because in those days, 1970s, most wives did not work outside of the home. And so to get the decisions done, you had to really see it with both of them together. And because of those hours, I obviously relied very heavily on Jackie, whom you know. So I started to call friends and co-workers who, fortunately for me, were not quite happy to, but they did business with me, so that was a starter. But to build my business from the time, how many friends have you got? So I resorted to cold calling, which wasn't knocking on doors or ringing people up, but it was a sort of a mail out system that I had. But anybody coming in the industry today, I don't think they do cold calling unless they were masochists or something like that. I couldn't think of any other reason to do it. But anyway, my MDRT meeting in 1973 at Seattle changed my career path completely, because then I started to see the benefit of referrals. Then I started to see how to build your business practice, the importance of hiring staff, delegating, and that type of thing. So the challenges were all overcome, but over a period of time. And when I say time, it was, it wasn't a few years. I mean, I'm still learning today, even though I'm not in practice at the moment, So is that answering the question? Or?
Yeah, look, I think what I'm getting from that is prospecting. So you're right, whilst, people may not cold call today, for successful practices, the challenge of prospecting and finding that ideal client and refining that is still true today as it may have been 50 years ago. But look, let's get into your craft and the book. So 2015, you released the book Skills That Succeed after you were basically encouraged to do that. You've recently converted it into an audio book, and it's really about, you refer to it as a communication guide for risk-based financial advisors. Has the book been well received? What sort of feedback are you getting? Will you be writing another one?
Okay, well, thanks for the plug. It was the first, was and still is the first of its kind ever written in Australia. Mm-hmm. And there's the introduction to the book talks all about that. But how did it go? I've sold just in excess of 700 copies of the book. In 2016, I sold 100 of them at MDRT to people from all over the world. So happy to tell people it's an international bestseller. Okay, and it was well received. And the purpose of the audio book was that there are a demographics of people today that don't read books. And at the behest of my daughter, Kristen, whom you've met, who was telling me that I had to get into social media and all of this type of thing, on the top of the list was an audio book. And so I finally started on that book not the audio book, on the first book, which was, you're mentioning there, that was in 2015. And then Kristen started talking to me about 2017 about going on with the audio book, which was just launched just around Christmas time. So it's still in its early stages, but I'm hoping to be able to reach the millennials or Gen X or Gen Y or Gen Z in that case. So I think probably, like a lot of my age group, I didn't deal well with the social media type things. I saw them as an evasion, but now Gavin Glazier, who's my manager in this, has got me terribly involved in it. Yeah.
Yes, I see now on Instagram and Facebook and all that, but I'd imagine that's not yet seen that.
I wish he'd send them to me. I've never seen any of them.
Look, in the book, and you say there are 4 questions that our clients are subconsciously asking themselves when they meet with a financial advisor, or in your case, a risk advisor for the first time. What are the questions, and how do you go about answering these questions when you're sitting in front of your prospective client in that first interview?
Well, I learned at a 2004 MDRT meeting, when people come to you for the first time, they subconsciously have 4 questions that they want answered. And if you do answer that, then not only will you be guaranteed of a follow-up meeting, but it's also an opportunity in that very first meeting to start building long-term relationships. The questions: do I like you? Do I trust you? Are you competent? Are you the sort of person who would put my best interest before your own? So in the do I like you? In 1977, you talked about, my involvement in the industry, in the association. In 1977, there was the first national, what is now the AFA conference held in Sydney. And the guest speaker was John Savage, who again was a legend, etc., in the United States, but was happy to come out to here. He was a wonderful success. And I got to know him personally, and he became a mentor. But sitting around, like us 30-somethings-year-olds sitting around with him one night, and we're saying to him, like, how do we build our reputation? How do we market ourselves away so we can be another John Savage? Every time you asked him something, he'd say, let me help you. So he said, let me help you. He said, character and reputation have very little in common. Character is who you are. Reputation is what others think of you. Never sacrifice character for reputation. And he said that if you people spend a lot of time trying to get people to like them. He said if they spent the same amount of time building their character traits, he said people would like them anyway. So that's been something that I've passed on to a lot of people, but it makes like your character is so important in our industry. Not the fact that you're the world's greatest salesman, where your focus is only on sales. That's right.
Mm-hmm. So do I like you? Next one, do I trust you?
Well, the public in Australia anyway is acutely aware of people who are talking the talk rather than walking the walk. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, what I tried to do was I suggest to people that they be transparent. In other words, if you've got a value set in the office and you bump into your clients out the football or something like that, those values don't change. In other words, you haven't got one set of value for the office and one set of values for the home. And it's one of the things that I think that, as old as I am and as experienced as I am, the trust is something that you have to continue to address on a daily basis. I mean, people buy from you. Why do people do business with you year after year? Well, it's built on trust. But once that trust is broken, the relationship is dissipated.
Look, and no doubt establishing that trust in that first interview, you talked about the use of penetrating questions with your prospective clients. So ones that require the prospect to.
Excuse me. Do you want me to go through those other two questions?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, let's do that if you wanted to. So,
well, the third question is, are you confident?
Yes.
And so when people meet with you for the first time, they expect two things of you. First of all, that you are competent, like the qualified, and secondly, that you can gather information and put together an insurance schedule or investment portfolio. But after that, what else do you bring to the table? Like after you say hello, what do you say that will separate you from all of your competitors? See, people buy people. And that's why I think the book is all about communication skills. Because you've been referred to somebody, you've got one shot at the title. And so this is just one of those questions. And then the other one is, you're the sort of person who put my best interests in front of your own. Well, universally, self-interest is the major problem in all our industries around the world. And while only a tiny proportion of people go astray in that area, the whole of the industry suffers from it. And that started with me in 1971 and is still around, as you know, at the moment. So I think that in today's industry, best interest is pretty much on everybody's plate at the moment. And the Hayne Royal Commission spent a lot of time on that. So I won't go into it. I just think that it has to be a natural character trait to want to put people's best interests before your own. It's just like the golden rule, do unto others, that sort of thing.
Yes. So,
okay, so you're asking me
competence and putting the client's needs ahead of ours, and all that's tied into the penetrating questions that you ask your prospects. One that requires a person to think about the answer before they answer. Correct. So what are some of the examples of penetrating questions you asked to the prospects? And more importantly, because you were quite deliberate in the way in which you conducted your interviews, why did you ask some of those questions?
Well, that's a good opening there. When you ask, if you ask a person a question, they say, why did you ask me that? They don't say, oh, well, I heard Russell Collins say it at a conference or something like that. That's not going to go. So you have to know why. Penetrating questions they have to think about, but they must say, Sam, why do you ask that question? And by the way, in that situation, this is why it's important to answer it, because opinions are something that we hold and convictions are something that hold us. So when people ask, why did you ask that? Your conviction comes out in it. You don't think, oh, I'll have to think about that. See, they don't buy insurance. They didn't buy insurance for me because they understood the product. They buy because they know you understand the product. You know, when people know that you know what you're talking about, then in my opinion, the biggest sale of all has been made. Like the relationship is underway. So my first question, what is your ambition so far as your working life is concerned? Now, that's a question that not a lot of people ask, but what I was looking for, Sam, was people who wanted to chart a career path and wanted to move up the ladder or into their own business or whatever. So when you say, what is your main ambition so far as your career is concerned, that could go a segue for a 5-minute discussion. But you know, one of the important things about listening is you listen with the ear of the heart. So you listen what it is that's driving that person. And now if he becomes a client of mine or she, and then they move on, well, they'll take me with them. So that was the whole purpose of that. People that were really career-oriented, I wanted to latch onto very early. Another question, which is related to one of the questions I asked, is your wife or spouse or partner working outside of the home? So if it was a 2-income family or a 1-income family, I had different questions. So on a 2-income family, the question I always asked was, how important is each's income to your current standard of living? So, and they tell you, well, mine this and that. So therefore, I can see they're depending upon each other. It's like a seesaw. I'll come back to that at a later stage if you like. But that's what I wanted to know, because if your income is doing this and he or she's income is coming, then what happens if he or she becomes disabled or whatever? What happens to that contribution? And the second thing is that when it was a 1-income family, let's say in my case in the 1970s and 80s, it was usually the husband was working and his wife was the homemaker. So again, this is a balance. Each has got a role to play. He goes off to work, she doesn't have to worry about the income. And while he's going off to work, he doesn't have to worry about the kids because his wife's taking care of that. So it leads, you know, so from my opinion, like how you could say in the event of your death to the husband in this situation, what provisions have you made for the continuity of your family's income and the payment of the mortgage? But in his wife or spouse or partner situation, if he or she dies, well, what happens? Like, how do you replace that? One of my biggest cases was all about that. With the person insured his wife, homemaker, and sadly she died within 12 months of taking the insurance out. But it saved his career and paid his mortgage and did all those other sorts of things, you know. So I don't want to get. So moving on, does your will contain an estate equalisation plan for your children? You see, in many divorce situations, or I'll just give you, there are 2 areas that this mattered. First of all, if you're in the regional area, which I wasn't, but quite often the farmer's got 3 daughters and a son, and the daughters go off and get married and the son has to work the farm, right? And he's working it for 20 or 30 years and dad dies. Well, who's the farm going to go to? Well, the will might say, divided equally amongst my 4 children, that wouldn't be fair. So what you talk to, the reason why you bring that up is, well, your son is doing all of this. If you had died yesterday, what about the other 3? By the way, the answer to that is to set up a policy for the other 3 girls so that on the farmer's death, that gets it. But what I was after more was where there've been divorces, and in the first marriage was usually a struggle street type thing. And in the second, if this is just a scenario, in the second meeting, in the second marriage, everybody hits their straps and they start to do well. And so I would ask, if I found out that they've been in a divorce situation, that was my question. Does your will contain an equalisation plan? And almost without question, almost without exception, people would say to me, you know, that's really a question that really concerns me, because I really love my children from the first marriage and I want them, but all this, my wealth has been accumulated in my second marriage. So I can't take it out of here and give it to there, you know. And so they ask you what your thoughts are and you go through it. And of course, the thought was that he takes out a life insurance policy with his other children as the beneficiary. If he dies, they get the share of the estate, and the second marriage didn't have to part with any assets, you know, at that point in time. So you're financially responsible for others outside of your marriage, and I used to say for aged parents, parents-in-law, or children of a previous marriage. So even though I said aged parents, parents-in-law, the real thing that I was looking for was children of a previous marriage. And so in that question, I would say to them, when if I knew they were divorced, are you providing any support for your family? Yes. Can I ask how much that is? And then the question here would be, how will that assistance continue in the event of your death or long-term disability? And everybody, like nobody ever said to me, well, I've got miles of insurance. You see, you have to ask the question, listen for the answer. And you listen with the ear of the heart means that what he says to you, I don't have a plan, but it really concerns me. In the file note, I put the question, I don't have a plan, but it really concerns me. That's listening with the heart, because now you know that he cares about his children, or she cares about the children, and so on like that. So that was the purpose of that. And so how is it going to continue? Most people say, I don't have a plan. So if they haven't got a plan and you've raised the question, then you can start moving with the plan as well. What would you regard as your most valuable asset? I mean, this is a great question to ask when you're discussing people's assets and liabilities. It's not something that is restricted to business owners, but everybody's got sort of assets and liabilities if you're meeting them one-on-one, even if they're not running their own business. But the time to ask the question is when you've got through discussing the assets and liabilities, and you say, what do you think would be your major asset? And they all say, well, they'll nominate a physical asset, principal residence, share portfolio, investment, or whatever. I only had two people that ever answered the question for me. One guy went like this, and he said, I'm a bricklayer. He said, my hands. And the other guy was a real estate valuer, and he just tapped his brain. So I think from your most valuable asset, as you know, is your ability to earn income. So you ask the question, you write it down, you keep going, and then later on you come back and revisit and tell them you go back to that question. Have I got time for any more questions, or is that?
Look, I was just thinking, you know, and on that most valuable asset, it's probably an opportune time to jump into maybe some of the concepts that you used in your interviews, you know, by starting by asking questions like that, and towards the end of the interview, you introduce concepts to take what you describe as taking your clients from the unknown to the known through the use of the familiar. Can we get into a couple of concepts, please, in terms that you used in those first interviews with your clients?
Well, if you take, I used to have, I've actually got a whiteboard here, but you can't see it. But if I was in, if you come back to the husband and wife, two-income family. Mm-hmm. So what I would say is you take down a note, well, what does your salary do? What's yours? So each salary is located for something. So then I go to the whiteboard and I draw a seesaw. So a circle with a long line across the top of it. And I put H here and W there, or whatever it's going to be there. So if I understand your situation, I'm talking to them, but I'm on the whiteboard. Now I'm standing, they're sitting. So I'm the educator, they're the educated. And I'm saying to them, I've got this thing here. If I understand correctly, you do this and you do that. So you're balancing each other. I put that on there. And then I would put, for example, a line through the husband, and then I'd redraw the seesaw, unbalanced seesaw. And I'd say, you know, when you rely on each other like this, you can't seesaw alone. So that's a simple type of concept. And you know, people, nobody said, well, and then you can redraw it if you like a third one, if they say you want, and then you can draw it and you just put a bag of money, like with dollar signs on it, and you say, now the seesaw is back to where it should be. Now, the most valuable asset was really interesting. Like, as I said, only two people ever answered that over hundreds of times I asked it. But they would, and then I'd come back and say, you mentioned this, but like your principal resident, can I put to you that your most valuable asset is your ability to earn income? And like everybody nods, nobody ever said no. And so if I was in the whiteboard, or if I was in my office, I go to the whiteboard, I write the word income on the whiteboard. And then I draw a triangle around it. And I said, income is what brings you and I to work every day. And there are only 3 events that will stop the income. That's where you draw that. So at the top of the thing, I put death, disability, and retirement. And then I'd say, and there are only 2 sources of income. And I draw a vertical line, and I put, if I was dealing with a woman, I'd do a stick drawing of a female, and vice versa, man. And then over here, I would put a box with dollars on it. And so I'd say there's only 2 sources of income. There's the work from your, like your normal, I'm trying to think of the word, your own work anyway. It'll come to me come to me tonight, I'll call you back, we can talk about that. It means your job, your daily job, you know. Personal exertion, that's the word. Personal exertion and capital at work. So if you become disabled or die, then the fallback, and I draw an arrow back, I say the fallback here is the capital that you put aside at that point in there to generate the income that you've lost. So people, I found this at my first MDRT meeting. People retain more of what they see than what they hear. So I was a busy concept person. Business owners, you've got all these other ones that you can use, and they're all in the book. And actually, a lot of those drawings that I talk about are in the book as well.
Yeah, look, and I was going to say that it's hard to get some of those through in time, and given the fact that we're on the webinar, but you go into them extensively in the book. I've had a question come through. I said I'll take them towards the end, but people are asking where the audio book's available. Should I just send them to your website? Is that what we do?
Yeah, rics.com.au.
Rics.com.
RICS. That's
RICS.
Risk Insurance Communication Skills.
Very good. Look, we've touched on the man who you are. We've touched on your craft, but you're such a humble person, and you don't really, and people don't really get a glimpse of the successful business that you've built. Again, because you prefer to talk about your craft rather than the result of it. So let's get into a couple of questions around your business before we get into the audience questions.
Could you could you tell me where you're at? I'm looking at the questions you sent me.
Sorry, yes. So we're at about renowned as a risk specialist. So we're 11.
Okay, good on you. Yeah, yeah. I don't want them to think that we've had any talking about this before the meeting.
So renowned as a risk specialist, but you built a multidisciplinary practice. Can you share your thoughts about sort of that type of business structure? What worked well and what challenges you sort of had, as part of that practice, that approach to practice?
Well, it's a good question because I have to say to the audience that my very first attempt at building what you call multidisciplinary practice was not very successful. Just very quickly, the life insurance companies when we're all attached to those in the 80s and early 90s, they started to introduce the philosophy of having a client from cradle to grave so that you handle everything right through there. So everybody was becoming a financial planner as well as that. So I had a short stint at it, and I soon realized that I couldn't be all things to all people. It would destroy my integrity. And so I just went back to doing what I did well. But when Matthew joined me in 1998 as my succession plan, and at the time he was 30 years of age, same as me when I went in the industry, and he spent the majority of his working life in the currency market, foreign exchange and all of that. So at that time, I was outsourcing superannuation and investment work, because I on the basis that people I outsourced to, they would give me their insurance work. Anyway, so when Matthew came, we spent the first couple of years becoming an expert, and he was a very good expert in the risk area. But he said to me, why are we giving all this business away? And I told him the story. He said, well, I could do that. And I said, well, because he had a background in that type of thing, and he was even at that time, I could see he had better business acumen than what I had. So he educated himself in those areas, and we brought everything, we kept everything. I left the others out where they were. And then the first thing he did after he's qualified with all that, he brought on an investment advisor, an investment analyst who's actually still with him at the moment, and then other staff as the opportunity presented itself. So if I come back to the multidisciplinary, it is, when I walked away from it with Matthew, he built it into a multidisciplinary, and good for him. I always said to people, my peers, that Matthew would turn out to be a better advisor, more, I expect that because he's better educated and so like that. And now Matthew's son, Timothy, my grandson, is now third generation. And Matthew's even saying at this stage, Tim's only been here for 5 years, and Matthew's saying Tim will be better than I was.
Very good.
So, it runs on.
So look, on the business structure, referral sources are a topic that quite often comes up in industry discussions. Did you have many referral sources or joint ventures as part of your career? And and if you did, what role did they play in your success and the success of your business?
Well, to be honest with you, I didn't have any success in joint ventures. In fact, between in the 70s and the 80s, there was a great enmity between accountants and financial advisors. I mean, they killed sale after sale after sale because they said to their clients, you don't need it. Usually that meant they didn't have any themselves, so they wouldn't know. However, I got through that. I did try it. At one stage, I was talking to 34 accountants. I used to meet with now 5 in one company and that type of thing. And I used to meet with them once a month for half an hour between 8:30 and 9. So I wasn't interfering with that. And I would talk about a product. I'd talk about something that was going on in the industry. And then I'd talk about a claim. And so for me, it was an education process. So I went for a year. And during that time, I didn't get one referral. And so at Christmas, when it was coming up for Christmas and I was coming in and how's things been? They thanked me. They said, you've been terrific, wonderful. And so I waited till the platitudes and I said, if it's been that valuable to you, how come you've never referred anybody to me? And there was silence. And then the senior partner, he said, well, Russ, he said, I got to tell you, he said, we put you on our agenda with every client meeting, review meeting. But he said, they come in with so many things we hadn't accounted for, and they know the clock's ticking away. We can't get to you before that happens. So what I realized is that I hadn't made them a client. You make them a client first. So if you're going to get in with a joint venture or so and so, say to the people, well, let me show you what I do. And if he says, oh, no, I don't want it, well, he's not going to refer anybody. If they become a client, I become a great advocate for you. So I just did referrals. And for me, if we haven't got the time, but for me, getting referred leads was a sales presentation all in its own. You don't say, who do you know? Well, that's what we're trained to do. Who do you know got married? Who do you know has just had a baby? Well, they know like a million people. They say, where do you want me to start? However, if you say to them, for example, just quickly, when you finish the review meeting, do you have any more questions? And they'd say, no. Now you've spent an hour, half an hour reviewing, no sales or anything, just reviewing it. So well, I got a question I'd like to ask you. And it's silence. And then I'd say, would you have any objection or any hesitation in referring me to 2 people who fit this profile? And then I'd hand them a profile. So I have one for business owners and one for sort of executives like that. Now you've cut the 1,000 people right down to, and I say for 2 people that fit this profile. And then some would give it to me then, or they give you one name. I'd say, I want you to think about it. I'll call you back in a few days, and I get the details, and I would contact these people. So referrals was the best thing for me.
And we could probably spend another half an hour on that topic alone.
I'm happy to stay on if you.
Look, tell us. So, what did the business look like when you sold it on to Matthew? What type of business and what did it look like over the 40 years of your craft that you've taught away?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned to you, Matthew was my success plan. So, by the way, that was 1998. I had approached him earlier than that, about 3 or 4 years earlier. He said he wasn't interested at all. But when he gets to 30, he won't be saying this. Most of the dealers and that, they're burnt out at age 30. They work extremely long hours. They work very hard. They get paid well, but they pay a price for it. So he said, okay, I'm part of his succession plan. So prior to selling the business, we, as Matthew had his own firm and I had my own firm, but what we did was that we formed a sort of a quasi partnership of two companies like this to share the overheads, keeping our own income because we're generating our own income on that basis there. So, and that helped me, you know, we had quite a number of people in the thing. So from that point, I've just lost my track there. Did you say, was there a challenge or something like that?
So what did the business look like when you sold it? So the structure, you know, the number of clients, you know, the level of staffing and advisors, etc.
Okay. So when he first started with me, when he first started, as people came in the office, I started introducing as my succession plan. And this is quick, but one day a client, and by the way, it was that lawyer that you mentioned to me earlier today. No, it wasn't him. Sorry, it was somebody else. Anyway, I walked him down to the car park and he said, I'm really pleased that Matthew's coming in, because he said, you and I are almost the same age. He said, I don't want to be ringing the nursing home in 20 years' time. I'd rather have somebody younger than me looking after me, you know. Yeah. So it went like, I went away for just after I turned 65, and then I was going to come back and think about what to do. And so from Matthew's point of view, when he took the business over, it was part of the plan was he took everything with it, including all the overheads. So that was a big adjustment for him, sharing it, but you know, he was quite happy to do that.
So an internal succession plan that worked, that made it a lot easier for you, and you started to make the introduction fairly. And I guess the reason I was asking you these questions because it's quite topical with, you know, advisors looking at their options and succession planning, given some of the challenges in the industry. Can you elaborate a little bit on terms of, you spoke about the fact that you had two separate entities and you had another entity that you use kind of like a dental or a medical practice to share overheads. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the succession plan and the buyer and how that was structured, without going into figures? But
are you talking about, you know, passing the baton, or are you talking about the structure of those firms? It was just Matthew had his company.
Yes.
Collins Financial Services, and I had mine.
Yes. So
as I say, a quasi partnership, no agreement or anything like that.
Right.
In terms of that, Matthew did do some joint ventures with accountants. What they did is that they set up a separate entity. You know, anyway, you probably know the way that it works, that all of the agencies would all the commissions and stuff would go into that. And then they had family trust coming out of that, and there'd be distributions done there. You can see from, and I don't say this in putting myself down, but Matthew was more in tune with that sort of stuff than I was. Even though I was, you know, when you come out of the public service, after 15 years, you don't come out with a great business brain. And I have to say, my whole career on that was a work in progress. As I learned something, and more importantly, the things that I brought back from MDRT was things that we could use in practice management. Yeah. So rather than the structures, if anybody wants to ask me separately, I'd be happy to give them the information.
Well, that'd be good, because I think, yeah, notwithstanding, you talk about the fact that you come from a public service, you may not have had a business brain, but you built a successful practice, you've successioned it well, and you passed the baton to Matt and consequently Tim as well. So you've done something right in that regard. But look, before I get to the audience questions, my last question, and it comes in, you know, a couple of parts. So the industry is going through significant challenges, you know, remuneration structures, education requirements, high barriers to entry, you know, red tape, etc. Where do you see this industry heading? Now, I know you haven't advised in the last 10 years. Is it still a worthwhile profession to be a part of? And how would you, I'm asking you that hoping you could answer that in an encouraging way.
You want me to leave out the Royal Commission and all that?
Yes, please. No rants.
Okay, well, I just mentioned to you about Timothy Collins. And so Timothy comes into the business 5 years ago, university qualified, and no knowledge or fears about the compliance regime or the remuneration situation. So he adapted quickly. There was no baggage for him to put out of the way. So for the future of the Timothys of this, Collins, I think that the future looks fantastic. Why is this? Because I think that the most important position in the financial services industry, in the work that you and I did, is that of a role of a financial advisor. Because in the insurance area, until an insurance application is given to the company, well, they've got nothing to do, so to speak, you know. And the same with an investment, things going to a fund manager. So that's going to always go on. And I think from the advisor's point of view, what I've seen with Timothy doing is that if they're well educated, they, in his case anyway, it's like a duck to water. There's a challenge. And so these people are more into challenges through their university education, something like that. So I say for them, I won't say like the world's your oyster and the future's is great, but there has to be like a work ethic that's going to drive this. And I have to say this to you, that there are people that used to say to me, well, he's very successful. Well, he owns this and he owns that and whatever. Well, you know, if success was built on possessions and wealth and position, that would make Mother Teresa a failure in that situation. So I would say to the advisors, and then particularly the new ones, like, learn the basics, and then stick to them. And as people go past you with their acceleration rate, well, don't worry, they may not be there in 5 years' time. By the way, when I started, 70% turnover in 2 years of advisors. That's what the rate was like back then. It's not like that now. So I think that you can't, like John Savage used to say, the only job you start at the top was digging a hole. And then it's downhill after that. So don't look too far ahead of being the most successful as a person. I just think focus on the basics, focus on your relationship skills. I mean, selling is an art, not a science. And what the advisors have, what you and I have, is that we're successful. You and I are successful because of our persuasive talents. And so if we were able to use those persuasive talents in the situation where the people we're working with the trust factor, we can show them something that they ought to be doing, where left to themselves, they would procrastinate. And I think that, I'm not sure, I haven't dealt with, other than Timothy, not being used, but they've got to learn their communication skills. Like, what do you say after you say hello? Like, you better have something to say. And by the way, you don't talk about the footy or the car park or anything like that. When you meet with people, I know when I was visiting people, business owners in particular, to talk about insurance, they didn't exactly red circle my name in their diary as the highlight of that day. So when you get in front of them, you get down to business straight away. And in fact, that's the best way to start the meeting out. Business is important to both of us. Is it okay if we get down to business straight away? They say yes. They don't say yes like that, but they say, yes, that's why I'm here. So is that answering your question? Or?
Yeah, no, look, you're obviously passionate about the industry, you know, and the work that we do on behalf of our clients. And I know you, in your book, you talk about the very privileged position that advisors are in,
Yes.
was we get to delve into, by asking those penetrating questions, the inner workings of a prospect's mind and their heart. And as professionals, other professionals don't really get a chance to engage with clients in that regard. But look, getting back down to business and a couple of audience questions, can you distill into a few sentences what the secret to your success was, Russell, over the last 40 years?
Well, on a personal basis, I have to say my wife, because when I started in the industry, leaving the public service where I'd started because my father wanted me to have a secure job, he was absolutely devastated when I left. And then, but I left with the 100% backing of my wife. And although like we've been married 58 years this year, but in this time when I was working, whilst she was in the homemaker role and I was earning the income. So I was the one that made the income. I was the one that made the income, but she made the income worthwhile.
Very good. That was an answer I wasn't expecting. So
well,
got another one.
Well, that's okay. That's one thing. That's personal. The other side is learn the basics. I just said that. Learn the basics. I mean, people who've known me for years say you've got tunnel vision. You know, like you haven't changed in the last 30 years. Well, if it worked 30 years ago, and by the way, the basics that worked in 1971 are still what I'm teaching people today. But you adopt a basic, you become good at it, and then you keep honing your skills on that one basic. Don Connolly in the United States makes this comment really interesting. He said, the more successful advisors become, the further they move away from the basics that made him successful in the first place. I said, why? He said, they just discard that and they go on. I've given plenty of talks, just finishing on this, where people like yourself or my peers come up to me afterwards and say, I said, what do you do in the audience? I say, well, I didn't learn anything new from you, but you just reminded me of all the things I used to do. And for some inexplicable reason, I've stopped doing them.
Look, and on that, I've got a chat comment from Mark Harris, and he's basically talking about the impact you had and influence on his business career, and the fact that he's now teaching, kind of like you've done with many people, including your own family, his daughter, about some of the concepts. And yeah, just thanks you for the success that you brought in his life and his professional career.
Thank you, Mark, for that feedback. Thank you.
Yes. You speak about the importance of preparation, punctuality, and presentation. Any other quick tips that you could give practitioners in our industry to help them stand out as professionals and successful business owners?
Well, first of all, professionals, the best definition of that, like there's millions of, you can ask 12 people the definition of professional and you'll get 12 things. Best I ever heard was professionals are defined not by the business they're in, but by the way they're in business. Now, that means that the motor mechanic who looks after my cars, is a real professional. People say, I refer to say he's very professional. So you don't have to have letters after your name. I mean, you could be the highest qualified person in the world and starve to death in our industry if you haven't got the ability to articulate that information, that knowledge to people in a way they both understand and act upon. So the professionalism is, in my opinion, is accepted. I used to worry about, back in the 70s, you know, a life insurance company might have a problem or say this, and the guys that go out and bad mouth that insurance company, you know, well, you do no service to the industry at all when you see something like this going wrong and you start to bad mouth them. Interesting, I found that whilst people that I did business with, they were aware of all these things that were going on, but like you, they're always quick to say, oh, but not my advisor. It might apply to them, but not my advisor. And that's the professionalism. As I said before, when they know that you know what you're talking about. That's this bit about competency. Like you can't fake ethics. Anyway.
Look, Russ, a man of great integrity, great professionalism. I did note that you took about 20 minutes before you first named John Savage. So for those of us who know Russ, that's on the record. But then you still went on to mention him again. There are a couple of other great concepts that I couldn't really go into, but I'd encourage people to pick up your book, Skills That Succeed, risk insurance communication skills.com.au, and also the audio book. Some people have said that they can't find the Facebook link. What we will do is when we send out the recorded version of the webinar and the CPD points, we'll make some references to where you can catch up with Russ.
I haven't got. They can't locate the Facebook link. Is that right?
Yes, but we'll sort that out and we'll show them the way. So thank you, Russ, for your time. It's been a privilege. I hope the audience has enjoyed a very small glimpse of the stellar career that you've had, an AFA Life member, Order of Australia medal recipient, and a great ambassador for our industry. So thank you for your time.